Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we're discussing Guilliman's alliance with the Aeldari. Has he crossed a line there's no coming back from? General spoiler warning to begin, as we will be discussing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, as well as specifically for the Dawn of Fire novel The Gate of Bones by Andy Clark. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, we've spoken about Guilliman's alliance with the Aeldari some on the channel before. For me, it's absolutely been one of the most fascinating developments within the current lore timeline, and combined with some of his other actions, namely the overthrowing of the High Lords of Terror and the legion-sized forces of the Unnumbered Suns, it really isn't an understatement to say he is walking a very fine line. For every million citizens who revere him as a returned demigod, there is a man in power who fears the Primarch's actions. One of the biggest factors that played on my mind was how does Guilliman even broach the subject of working with Aeldari to his commanders. We've seen in the events of Dark Imperium Godblight by Guy Haley that it remains very cloak and dagger. The existence of an Aeldari representative amongst his council is quite clearly still a closely guarded secret. And the author Guy Haley makes it clear that Guilliman is playing with fire, in terms of the Imperium at least, with a mention of it being a damaging secret. And that it undoubtedly is. Considering Godblight is pretty much our latest point in time, at least in regards to the main Guilliman story, it appears not only is the working relationship with the Aeldari still in place, but it's also something that Guilliman fears being revealed, at least in terms to the wider Imperium. However, during the events of the Dawn of Fire novel The Gate of Bones, we actually got to see Guilliman revealing the Aeldari representative, Ilian Nataze, to the senior commanders of his fleet, which for me was not only very surprising, but I can't help but think a very determined, yet risky move for Guilliman to make. And the question really is here, why? If you haven't read it yourself, do yourself a favour and check it out, because we all interpret the events and lore in our own ways. How I view the events and how you view them are always going to be different. As I always say, it's the great thing about the lore. Now, the assembly of people was obviously a fairly grand affair, considering how large each of the Indomitus fleets are. Anybody and everybody of importance within Guilliman's fleet primus was assembled, from your standard human militarum commanders, Imperial Navy, Firstborn Space Marines, Primaris, members of the Adeptus Ministorum, basically the Ecclesiarchy, which is something I want to come back to later, and even Belisarius Cawl himself, with Tribune Colquhoun of the Emperor's Custodes. It's a gathering of who's who for Guilliman's forces. And Guilliman is not a fool. He doesn't just roll it off his tongue announcing the Aeldari like it's nothing. It is pretty clear he is fully aware the reception a Xenos would get. So before revealing anything to the assembly, he makes a very clear and defining statement, essentially telling them all he has invited this guest, that none of them are to act or even voice their displeasure, and anyone who even contemplates it will answer to him. And again, to me, this is a pretty defining moment for Guilliman, because he's laying it clear in no uncertain terms, well, that he is consorting with Xenos. However you want to look at it, at its barest bones, that's what it boils down to. He has sought out and invited this emissary. There's no mention of we, there's no mention of the Imperium, or even the Emperor of Mankind. It's all a very clear I. Guilliman is taking it all on his shoulders. Now, as you might expect when an Aeldari comes strutting into the room, there's the obvious widespread shock and whispers flooding across the room, and Guilliman has to shout for them all to be silent. Even Tribune Colquhoun, the representative of the Custodes, was apparently unaware given his reaction that this would be happening. And before we continue dissecting these events, let's try and answer the question of why. Why would Guilliman be so open in this, if even later during the events of the Plague War, it's still very much a closely guarded secret? For me, I see the returned Guilliman as a very conflicted soul, as we've said before. The Imperium he left was a very different one to the one in which he returned. The Guilliman of the Great Crusade was a very open man, a commander who actively encouraged discussion amongst his legion, who openly discussed the theoretical and the practical of every situation with them, who encouraged them to question, who welcomed it. He was raised upon Macragge, which heavily resembled the historical beginnings of ancient Rome, and most importantly its Senate. As those principles were the foundation of Macragge, they became the foundation of Guilliman, and thus they became the foundation of his legion. The Guilliman we have now within this new Imperium, I believe, is a man who still wishes to reignite these virtues, to bring these principles to the Imperium around him. He doesn't want to have to keep secrets. He wants to have open discussion and trust. He wants his word to be enough. The problem is, as we know, this is a different Imperium entirely, an Imperium of extremes. There is no room for discussion, only survival. Even Guilliman's time as Lord Commander during the Scouring, I really believe, wouldn't have prepared him for this. Yes, that may have been the beginning of the end for the Imperium, but he still had the luxury of his brother Primarchs around him. They still had the virtues of the Imperial truth. Guilliman here wants to have an open discussion. He wants to be open with his commanders. It's a bit of a strange dichotomy that he's a self-appointed regent, yet wishing for open, level-headed discourse. And as we know, that's really the ultimate aim of Guilliman, especially at this point, to bring the Imperium back to its more scientific founding, away from the extremism in every aspect. Now, the introduction begins smoothly, with Nataze being as diplomatic as you'd expect an emissary of the Aeldari to be. However, it's not long before the undeniable uproar comes from the audience, with one officer revealing reports of Aeldari forces attacking Imperium worlds across the rift. And he even manages to sum up the courage to tell Guilliman to his face that the Aeldari only assisted in bringing him back because it benefited them. And well, to be fair to the man, he's not exactly wrong. However, his comments lead to a bit of a speech by Guilliman, And while it may appear an impromptu response, I get the feeling it's far from it. Guilliman begins by agreeing with the commander that the Aeldari cannot be trusted. He reveals he has known Eldrad Ulfran since the time of the Great Crusade, and that he's even worked with him several times. Which, off the top of my head, I don't recall Guilliman and Eldrad coming face to face in any of the books. I may be wrong and I haven't gone back and researched it thoroughly, but in thinking I really can't remember it. So there could be some interesting novels or short stories up ahead. However, continuing, Guilliman states that although Eldrad and Ivrain were instrumental in bringing him back, he will not be manipulated by them. He knows they most likely only did bring him back for their own agenda, but they do not, and they will not control him. If mankind wished to crush the Aeldari race, they could. And it's a nicely laid subtle message by Guilliman here. He's letting his case be known to the Aeldari. Don't play your games with me. I can and will obliterate you from the stars if I must. But he's also subtly belaying the fears of the audience. An audience that is, rightly so, absolutely aghast that the Primarch, the Imperial Regent, has not only been consorting with Xenos, he's brought them into his presence. Guilliman here is reaffirming to them the might of the Imperium, that he's not having this discussion from Xeno manipulation. He's having it because he chooses to. Because the Imperium is the stronger, is the more honourable. It's a very clever game by Guilliman here, using his words to convey two messages. And after he has done so, he very cleverly tries to unite their cause by mentioning together the joint foe, chaos. Again, this appears to be a spur-of-the-moment response from Guilliman, but you get the sense that it is far from it. It's pretty clear the message he is trying to send to his own men as much as Nataze. Whether he got the response he was hoping for or not, only Guilliman can say. However, like I said, considering it's still a very closely guarded secret in Godblight, I don't think there's been much movement in Imperium viewpoints in any regard. And I can't help but think Guilliman took a big gamble in revealing his communication with the Aeldari. Like I said, I understand his reasons and logic for doing so, but it's a mighty gamble considering the viewpoint on Xenos within the Imperium, and especially so considering the political opponents he has within the Imperium as well. There are members of the Ecclesiarchy here, and this whole assembly is being written down and recorded. It certainly takes the theories to a whole new level. Now we know knowledge is most likely out there, within the circles of power at least. Guilliman may entrust the forces of Fleet Primus, but there's no way this kind of news would not have been passed through the Ecclesiarchy. And no doubt the same can equally be said of the Custodes passing word back to Terra. It does make you wonder how this could all come into play when the revelation of Imperium Secundus comes to pass, when his actions may well be already being questioned more than we ever realised. Since his return, Guilliman has always been playing a very political game, one that admittedly he does not want to have to do. However, the more we see of his actions, while I do not doubt his intentions, I just can't help but wonder if he's crossed a line that he just can't come back from, and that it all might just come back to haunt him. In Guilliman's desires to reinstill the virtues of Macragge, there's a very real risk that he may just be causing himself more problems somewhere down the line. But as always guys, what do you think? Considering Guilliman knows he has to keep his allegiances with the Aeldari secret, why do you think he revealed it so to the rest of Fleet Primus? Was this an attempt to reinstill the virtues of old? Or was this a move out of simple necessity, knowing there was no way he could keep it secret from so many commanders? And what do you think of having members of the Adeptus Ministorum present? Is there any way this knowledge hasn't circulated back to the rest of the Ecclesiarchy? Considering Guilliman's already tense relationship, is this only going to cause him more problems? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. If you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.